And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will this frumpy, disease-carrying raccoon come home with me if I hand-feed it? And just which Facebook relationship status is the creepiest? And now, the podcast host who prides himself on punctuality, except when it comes to puberty, Pete Dominic.
Yes! Hi! Hello there. Oh, what are you, walking your dog there? What is that, a golden retriever? Oh, it's a Labradoodle? Yeah, I don't know my speech. All right, I'll just mind my own business. Nice to see you. Thank you very much for joining me here on the podcast today, and anytime that you decide to download Stand Up with Pete Dominic daily, it is daily, every day, usually, almost always, two guests, sometimes one. But I have two great guests joining me today, Dr. Meghan May, who is an infectious disease expert, and Professor Eric Siegel, who is a constitutional law expert. Great conversations with both of them. Learned a lot from both of them, and happy to have you joining me here today on the podcast. Thank you for all of those of you who joined me last night for Team Stand-Up's inaugural meeting. 25 or more. There's more than that. Subscribers, stand-up community members joining me to talk about, brainstorm ideas on how we can grow the show, make the show better, and promote it. Awesome to have both John Carroll and Pete Co. there, because both of them contribute to the program in many ways. John has written the music. Pete is my announcer now. And, you know, Pete, I was thinking about this, saying this privately, but what the hell? Let me give you a full-throated endorsement. Let me clear my throat first. Pete Co. is an excellent voiceover artist. He is studying voiceover, but let's just make him the announcer of Stand Up Pete Dominic, because he's a great guy. He's talented, hardworking dad and husband out there in Northern California, and he is now the announcer. You're hired. You are hired as the announcer of Stand Up Pete Dominic. Anybody who wants to submit ideas for Pete to voice, jokes, we welcome them. John Carroll, Pete Co., and so many more contributing to this program, and great ideas last night at Team Stand Up. We will do that again, and you'll be hearing me implement those ideas both on the show and as a way to promote it. So thank you for all of your support. If you haven't subscribed to the program and become part of our community, you should. What are you doing? Start now. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or the paid subscription link in the show notes and join over 800 amazing, kind, thoughtful, generous, hilarious, brilliant, curious people along with you. And I'd love to interview some of you. If you'd like to be interviewed on the show, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Everybody has a story to tell, and I want to tell your stories this summer. What have you overcome? How did you do it? What have you succeeded in? What are you struggling with now? Share with us so that we can commiserate and come up with ideas on how to make things a little easier, a little better, a little more efficient, productive, successful, whatever adjective, superlative word you want to describe. You want to be on the program, tell your story, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, let's get to the news. Hit the last 24, Keith. All right. Let's see what happened yesterday. The Justice Department appealed a district court ruling that ordered it to release the entire memo used in 2019 to justify not charging Trump with obstruction of justice in the Russia investigation. Friends like Sarah Kendzior and others are outraged that the Biden Justice Department is seemingly protecting the Trump Justice Department. What's that all about? A lot of questions there. Trump's former White House counsel agreed to testify, Don McGahn, but behind closed doors about Trump's effort to obstruct the Russia investigation. That'll be interesting if we ever find out what he testifies. Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell both condemned Marjorie Taylor Greene, apparently after they were pressured by their donors and other Republicans for comparing COVID-19 safety measures to the treatment of Jews during the Holocaust. Oh, boy, can I believe that that's happening? A lot of people are saying Marjorie Taylor Greene is the new Trump. What do you think of that? Moderna said its COVID-19 vaccine provided strong protections in teens ages 12 to 17. They say 100%. And now, just in case you're not following along, Pfizer has already been approved for teenagers. My daughter got the Pfizer juice. But now Moderna is trying to get approval, and tests say 100%. And so hopefully that'll be approved soon. Half of the adults in the U.S. are now fully vaccinated. Yeah, I say that deserves applause. I don't know about you. Okay, let's get to this day in history. I'm going to try that today. This day in history, when the last Confederate generals surrendered. General Edmund Kirby was the commander of the Confederate Trans-Mississippi Division, surrendered on May 26, 1865. One of the last Confederate generals to capitulate, except he came back as Senator Rand Paul. And here's Stephen Colbert on CBS Late Show.
One person who will not be allowed in the theater, Kentucky senator and man whose haircut is the hair left on the floor after other people's haircuts, Rand Paul. Senator Paul has been a bit of a skeptic of how bad COVID really is, which is probably why he got COVID. But there's one thing he's decided not to get, the vaccine.
I've just made my own personal decision that I'm not getting vaccinated because I've already had the disease and I have natural immunity now.
Okay, but no one really knows how long that immunity lasts. And more importantly, your choice is going to affect other people. I have made my own personal decision to microwave clam chowder in the office break room. As for his reasoning, he ransplained.
Should they force people to get vaccinated that already had COVID and survived? They would first have to prove that the vaccine is better than being infected.
No, they don't. They don't have to prove that seat belts are better than accidents, or that wearing a parachute is better than hitting the earth at terminal velocity, or that having hot spikes driven into your ears is better than listening to Rand Paul. It's self-evident.
Colbert on the CBS Late Show, which also announced that it would be coming back with a full live studio audience at the Ed Sullivan Theater, where I've actually warmed up the audience for that show several times. Everybody's going to have to be vaccinated, and so that'll be very exciting to have a live audience for that show and everywhere else. All right, moving on. Could former disgraced president Donald Trump be indicted by this summer? Manhattan's District Attorney Cy Vance has convened a grand jury. That's a big deal. It's expected to decide whether to indict the former president, other executives at his company, or the business itself, should prosecutors present the panel with criminal charges, according to two people familiar with the development, and that is the Washington Post reporting. And here is Neil Katyal, former Solicitor General, legal expert on MSNBC, talking about this yesterday.
And so I think the public has had a lot of fatigue about this, and they see Trump get away with thing after thing. But those of us trained in the law basically know, Nari, this day was going to come. I mean, who didn't know that, who's trained in the law? I mean, Trump was a lawless, mob-like figure. And you saw it in your extraordinary segment yesterday where you interviewed kind of the three horse people of the apocalypse for Donald Trump. And those three people said two important things. One, each knows Donald Trump and the Trump children very well. And number two, each of them is cooperating with prosecutors against Donald Trump. And the convening of a grand jury is very significant because it's a really unique investigative tool. It's not something you start unless you have serious evidence as a prosecutor. And Andrew is exactly right. This panel is going to work 3 days a week, and that's got to make Donald Trump nervous. I mean, they're working a lot more longer hours than he ever did, and all is focused on him. And the grand jury is a secret thing. So when people go in, like, perhaps the people you had on your show yesterday, they don't go in with their lawyers. They go in by themselves. And that's for an important reason, because, maybe their lawyers are paid for by the figurehead of the criminal enterprise or something like that and telling them what to say. But when that witness goes in, she or he tells her truth or his truth only to those people in the grand jury and the prosecutor. It's a powerful tool for getting at the truth, and that's got to make Donald Trump very worried.
Well, I like the idea. I love the idea, frankly, of Donald Trump being very worried. That is Neil Katyal speculating. But if I'm going to listen to anybody speculating on this, it would be him. He's got a lot of experience on it. And across the cable news networks and everywhere else, there were legal experts speculating on what this meant for Donald Trump. But I'm going to skip ahead. I'll get a guest on that. We'll talk about it. But there's a lot more news to get to, though. That is a major, major development. I don't know how to make that a bigger deal. And, of course, he's being investigated in so many other jurisdictions as well. All right. So on Tuesday, yesterday, of course, that's what I'm talking about. It's the last 24. CNN correspondent Kyung La chased down the Arizona Senate president named Karen Fann, who is behind this whole fraud the fourth recount on the Arizona election. Now, Karen Fann has been among the most ardent proponents of the election audit currently being conducted in Maricopa County, Arizona. The Republican state legislature authorized a Florida firm called Cyber Ninjas, which has never conducted an election audit before, to conduct this one. Makes no sense, of course. But here it is, CNN correspondent Kyung La, who had apparently requested like 15 times to interview this woman, finally just tracks her down in the Arizona Senate parking lot, apparently.
I don't know what's legit, what isn't legit, but why wouldn't we want to answer those questions?
You're questioning democracy.
No, I'm questioning the integrity of the election system.
Which is the backbone of democracy.
That's right, which means we should have full 100% confidence in our democracy and in our election system.
But you're talking about trying to disprove conspiracies.
If I have to, yes. Why wouldn't we? If somebody says something is out there, I would love to be able to say, that's not true, guys.
Aren't you raising more questions by giving rise to these conspiracy theories?
No.
If someone tells you that there's a dog man in their backyard, shouldn't you investigate it? Yeah, I mean, listen, if someone's telling us that there's a half dog, half man in their backyard, we need to send a team of people over there to investigate that dog man person. So that is a crazy person who is the head of the Republican Senate in Arizona, in charge of this unneeded, unnecessary, undesirable, inaccurate, dishonest, corrupt, fraudulent audit. Fraud for short. Okay, at today's Last 24, I just got a bunch of rando clips for you. I didn't really get together a through line, a chunk, or a bit that I can tell so far, but here's another good one from yesterday. This is comedian, actor, screenwriter, he does it all, Seth Rogen, appearing on Good Morning Britain to promote his new book, Yearbook. He was asked to weigh in on his past movies containing controversial jokes, and he went viral yesterday for, I'll just give you just a quick clip of what he said.
Saying terrible things is bad. So if you said something terrible, then that's something you should confront in some way, shape, or form. I don't think that's cancel culture. That's you saying something terrible if that's what you've done. You know?
Well, you gotta.
All right, Seth Rogen putting it pretty succinctly right there. I like that a lot. And he went viral for that interview in the comments about cancel culture versus being accountable for things you say, especially with comedians, which we share that opinion, need to really stop complaining about cancel culture, in my opinion. All right, so now I want to move on to another random clip. This is just some political analysis from Chris Hayes that I grabbed last night from All In on MSNBC.
Here's my theory. Republicans can't turn on Trump because he would take a huge chunk of the party with him, and what they value more than anything are winning elections and retaining power. If something were to come along, this sort of like exogenous thing to just come in and like a helicopter, like whoop, and then just deposit him off the scene of American politics, and still also fuel all of the people in the MAGA base with resentment and anger at the no good liberals who are prosecuting him for politically motivated, that would be essentially, I think, a kind of weird win-win for Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell. What do you think?
Thanks, Chris. I think that's great analysis. As always, I think that you have a very extensive vocabulary. I mean, I'm not sure who uses the word exogenous. Is that, I can't even pronounce it. Words like vanguard, I heard him use it today. The vanguard of thinkers on this. What? And also, I think you need an allergy pill. But other than that, I really like your analysis because Donald Trump is really bringing the party and has brought the party to such far extremes that people like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others have risen to tremendous power in that. Well, they got elected, first of all, and they believe in the crazy, crazy thing. So I thought that was good analysis that he's basically saying the crazy has so much power over leadership in the Republican Party that they really can't get anything done because they have to deal with the crazy all the time. Okay, so moving on, one more. What else do we have for you today on the menu of clips? Oh, yeah, I thought this was interesting because it's Dana Bash on CNN talking to Wolf Blitzer on CNN, and not necessarily inherently interesting just by the idea of those two folks talking, but I thought it's interesting because they both are Jewish and their family members were killed in the Holocaust. And they are reacting, of course, to Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments comparing wearing masks to what Jews suffered in a genocide. It's just absolutely reprehensible, and she's not going anywhere, which, is that a bad thing if we want to minimize the thinking of the Republican Party and their influence? I don't know, but here they are talking about it. I thought this was powerful and moving.
There was this tweet today from the Auschwitz Memorial and Museum in Poland, right where the Auschwitz death camp existed. Let me read it. The instrumentalization of the tragedy of Jews who suffered, were humiliated, marked with a yellow star, isolated in ghettos, and murdered during the Holocaust in a debate on different systems that aim at protecting public health is a sad symptom of moral and intellectual decline. A very strong statement from the Auschwitz Memorial and Museum. For you and me, it's not just political. It's not just the story we're covering. This is a very personal issue, given the fact that both of us, we lost family during the Holocaust.
That's right. And none of this should be political. This isn't about political party. This is about right and wrong and ignorance and whitewashing something that was a stain on humanity and human history. And I mean, the fact that Auschwitz had to come out with this incredibly powerful tweet. My grandparents were Nazi refugees. My great-grandparents perished at Auschwitz. Maybe a yellow star was something that was, yellow star was horrible. Being gassed, which is what my great-grandparents were, is a whole different thing. And to compare that to the notion of public health and wearing a mask is just beyond the pale. I can't imagine what it's like for you, Wolf. Your parents were in slave labor camps.
Yeah, and I'm a son of Holocaust survivors, but all four of my grandparents were murdered during the Holocaust. Two of them at Auschwitz were murdered. I never knew any of my grandparents as a result of that. My parents did survive. They were young, they were strong, and they came to the United States, started a new life after World War II in beautiful Buffalo, New York, and had this great opportunity. But I've often said, especially since we saw on that January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol, that guy wearing that Camp Auschwitz shirt. My parents have passed away, but if they would have seen that, they would have said, how is that possible here in the United States of America to see something like that going on? And if they would have heard the words from this so-called Congresswoman utter these ugly, ugly comparisons between wearing masks to save yourself, to save others, they wouldn't have believed that this was possible in our country.
Powerful stuff from the Wolf and Dana Bash on CNN yesterday. And also yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And I want to play at least one clip for you on that. Paul Butler, who is a legal analyst and a professor and author who has written a lot about police abuse and accountability, really good guy. I've met him several times, interviewed him several times. He was on Deadline White House yesterday on MSNBC, and Nicole Wallace asked him what's changed, what we've learned in this year since George Floyd's death.
Derek Chauvin is a convicted murderer. The evidence was overwhelming, but we could never take that conclusion for granted. That's not usually the case when a police officer kills an African-American man. But, Nicole, this is how I will measure progress. When I stop being scared, when I see a cop car behind me, when seeing that officer doesn't make me anxious. And I don't feel any less anxious now than I did last year or 10 years ago.
A long way to go. Well said, Paul Butler. And let's go to COVID now, where Dr. Kavita Patel was on MSNBC talking about the state of trust in America around whether or not someone's been vaccinated or not as we head back into the before times or the normal or whatever you want to call it. It'll never be normal again. But how do we behave? How do we react to people? Do we trust our friends, our family members, our coworkers? I thought this was a thoughtful and nuanced answer and wanted to share it with you, Dr. Kavita Patel.
Yeah, I have said in other settings that I don't think that we should leave it to kind of an honor system or trust. But really, it's not because I believe the person next to me wants to lie or wants to put me in harm's way. it has a lot more to do with why people don't admit that they might not want to get a vaccine or might be embarrassed about some questions they never got a chance to ask somebody. So I do think that we have to be much more transparent. And you're right, Nicole, it's not something public health officials or scientists or health experts do well. I do think we are going to be kind of dealing with, well, it depends on how the cases are. We're seeing cases continue to decline. And as long as we see cases declining, Nicole, I think people will go back into the workplace and there will be requirements to show their vaccine status. And everywhere else, people will kind of wonder until we see the fall, hopefully as close to zero cases as possible. And then we just kind of trust that we're feeling normal again.
Trust that we are feeling normal again. Yeah, well said. Okay, well, that is the last 24. That's all the audio I've got to share with you, but a lot more headlines coming up because it's time for the news dump. News rapid fire style. Coming at you.
Grizzly bear recognized by his shoulder hump just before you're violently mauled for today's news dump.
Oh, my God. Oh, that was terrifying. That one was almost too scary, Pete. Really good job. But I think I would recognize a grizzly not by its hump, but that it's a grizzly. I think you just needed a word that rhymed with dump right there. Oh, I love them. Well, good news if you are a river otter or you love river otters, because conservationists are thrilled that what they thought was an extinct wild river predator has popped up. Yeah, the giant river otters are native to South America. And one of these otters was discovered in Argentina by conservationists working to reintroduce the population into the wild. There are currently 3 other giant river otters in the state, all living in captivity. And it's just a great story. So I thought I would lead with that right now on the news dump. Wrestler John Cena, lots of folks say, disgraced himself when he apologized in Mandarin Chinese for calling Taiwan a country. He is being referred to as a, quote, sellout. Did you see that video of him speaking Chinese? I should have grabbed the audio from that. I forgot about it. Joe Biden's job approval ticked up to 62%, which is a pretty big deal. First black woman was appointed to the Missouri Supreme Court. And in a photo next to an old white man, he seems to be fine with it. Her name is Justice Robin Ransom, and she was appointed to replace a judge who retired in March, the second woman to serve on the state's Supreme Court, according to ABC News. The WNBA has suspended a coach after body shaming a player during a game. The head coach and general manager of the Connecticut Sun was fined $10,000. His name is Kurt Miller. He was suspended for 1 game for commenting to an official on the size of a player. Apparently, Connecticut Sun head coach challenged referee's call, saying, "Come on, she's 300 pounds." The Aces center added all the facts, and it's actually 6'8" and 235 pounds. So he was fined for getting her weight way off and suspended. What do you think? A California toddler has become the youngest American Mensa member with the IQ of 146. I guess that's pretty high. I don't have a high enough IQ to know whether or not that's a high IQ, but a 2-year-old girl in California become the youngest American member of Mensa with a genius-level IQ. That's pretty impressive. Experts are saying she's already more intelligent than Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Here's another controversial story. The stars of the show Fixer Upper on HGTV, Chip and Joanna Gaines, I guess they're pretty famous people. Well, yesterday they donated to a campaign against teaching critical race theory in schools. Sounds like their image is going to need a fixer-upper after this, huh? Although the people that probably watch that show, a lot of them are fine with it or will never learn of it, right? Will it matter? I don't know. I think that sucks. My friend Dustin texted me and said, "Oh, man, you'd love that show." Maybe. I haven't seen it, but I'll stick to YouTube for now. There's always a guy who can teach me exactly what I need to know on all my silly little projects. And he is not donating any money against teaching history. Actually, I don't have any idea what he's donating to or care about his politics. I really just want to know how to make a fence gate. Oh, and here's a sweet story coming from Kansas, where a Kansas state representative, a Republican, has been charged with battery for allegedly kicking a male high school student in the nuts. That's right. State Rep Mark Samsel was arrested late last month on 3 charges of alleged misdemeanor battery after the altercation at Wellsville High School. He has since pleaded not guilty. Videos taken by students from the class show that the guy was talking to the students about God, the Bible, masturbation, and suicide just before he kicked one of them in the nuts. And that is where I'm going to end today's news dump, because it's not getting better or worse, depending on how you look at it, than that. All right. Professor Eric Siegel coming up. Before that, Dr. Meghan May. But before that, I want to tell you about my friend, listener, and subscriber, Frank Zrinsky. Frank was at Team Stand-Up meeting last night, and we've been corresponding over the years. He's been a longtime listener and just a great, super smart guy. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Motion City Media, which is in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And he emailed me yesterday and said that he wanted to share how excited that he was to learn that I'm working with Indeed.com as a sponsor of this show. And Frank, he said after we hired everyone that matched our culture and vision at Motion City Media from within our network, Indeed.com has been the only career search website that we trust and use on a recurring basis. He said, we've had a tremendous amount of success finding candidates through Indeed.com that lined up nicely to the job postings without having to sort through endless resumes. Some of our hires from Indeed have been absolute gems. Steven is one of our client services specialists for studio support as an employee, has also been one of our most requested real estate photographers. He's a super kind, accountable, and perfect fit at Motion City Media, basically hand-delivered by Indeed.com. How about that? How about that? So go to Indeed.com/stand-up like Frank Zrinsky of Motion City Media, who's a listener and subscriber to this show. Get a quality short list of candidates whose resumes match your job description, and only pay for the candidates that meet must-have qualifications. Schedule their interviews all on your Indeed dashboard. Get started right now with a free $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your post at Indeed.com/stand-up. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/stand-up. Terms and conditions apply. Offer is valid through June 30th. And Frank, thank you very much for that testimonial for Indeed, because I think that's a lot better than anything I could read that they have asked me to. So Frank Zrinsky, Motion City Media, and Indeed.com/stand-up. Go now. All right. Okay. Now it's time to get to my first guest. Joining me, her name is Dr. Meghan May, and she is a scientist, and she's an academic, and she's been a regular on this program over the last year or so. She was the first person to reach out and tell me that I needed to be concerned and thinking about and making people aware of COVID-19, and that was, I think, in December of 2019. She is a medical professor, and go to scienceandstories.com, where she publishes her blog, and follow her on Twitter at drmay5. I had a whole bunch of questions, from masking, from the question about the origins of the virus, from how research is done, and we had fun and laughs, as we always do. Always a great conversation, and here it is, Dr. Meghan May, right now. Dr. Meghan May, always happy when you are able to join this podcast and we can learn from you. So much to learn from you. How are you? How are you doing up there?
I am super. Our weather does not suck anymore, which is great. It's always happy this time of year. So I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me again.
Of course. We always love when you join the show. People love hearing from you. And for some reason, they like when we kid each other when we talk. It's always fun. I put a lot of pressure on us now, Meghan, but I do want to ask you.
I know I have to be funny.
No, you don't. I shouldn't have said anything. Damn it. Damn it. Let's just do what we do. We'll just talk, and when things happen, they happen. Well, let's start, though, with masks and masking and mask mandating, because, you know, you just have some opinions on this. You're obviously an expert on infectious disease, but just you can look back at things and see what's worked and what hasn't worked. But the bottom line with the masking that I've been saying on the podcast is it's confusing. Just be patient with people and don't get mad at anybody that wants to wear a mask or a place that asks you to wear a mask. And if you don't want to, you don't necessarily have to, especially if you're vaccinated. And I don't mean to simplify it, but what are your thoughts on masks and masking, especially since your state has kept the order in place, I think, or at least up until recently?
They have, although it expires this coming Sunday. So I was so proud of that. I was like, fortunately in Maine, we don't have to deal with all of this confusion because our mask mandate is still in place. But and I understand as tourist season comes up that the governor is like, I don't want to dissuade people from coming because a lot of people genuinely hate wearing their mask. So I get it. But at the same time, it really spared local businesses a lot of the kind of drama that was surrounding places when the announcement was first made. Anyway, my first impression on hearing the announcement was people are going to love this. My second impression was, oh crap, this is going to create such a big giant headache. Yeah. And the reason why was and this has been repeated, I think, in several circles now, it's just there isn't a good way of knowing if a person walks into your house, your restaurant, your store, whatever, if they're vaccinated or not. And so absent any way of actually verifying that, you're on an honor system, which I think we're all feeling a little bit, shall we say, shaky about these days. And so the issue was, it was frustrating because it would seem like this was a little predictable, that you would have an instance where a vaccinated person can walk into a store, no mask, and everything's fine. An unvaccinated person can also walk into that same store, no mask, and no one will be the wiser. So a business, of course, has a right to say, if I can tell you can't come in here without shoes and without a shirt. And I don't know why, by the way, pants are never part of those signs, but that's another story.
I think that goes without saying that you have to wear pants.
Like pants are implied, but I don't know.
But shirt and shoes should be too. But there probably was an issue where people weren't wearing shirts and shoes enough, and they said we've got to have a sign for this.
Exactly, something must be done. There weren't as many in the pants-free crowd, but anyway, they don't hang around my kids enough. The point of this is, sorry.
That's fine.
Focus, May. The point is that, a business is well within their right to say you can't come in here without wearing a mask. And so my first thought after having my, oh crap, this creates a problem moment was, all I could think of was some poor 16-year-old whose job it is to sit right by the door at Target where they have the big booth with all the masks if you forgot yours and stuff. And, that poor 16-year-old who's going to have to tell people they can't come in without a mask. And how often are they going to get screamed at and have people's finger in their face? Like, the government said I don't have to. First they told me I had to wear masks and now they told me I don't have to. And
kid's like, I'm 16.
I know, this poor kid's probably sitting there like, this is not my decision, dude.
I'm making $9 for this.
Exactly. So all I could think was like, oh man, these poor workers are just going to get even more crap than they've already gotten. And that felt really, unfair, like they were in a really junky position. But at the same time, if a business then says, okay, no masks for anybody are going to be required, then you create this weird tension of people looking around at somebody who doesn't have a mask on and being like, dude, I don't buy that you're not vaccinated. And at the same time, you could have a bunch of people saying, oh God, how paranoid are you? You're still wearing your mask. And I mean, I'll be blunt. It was really nice to be able to hide behind my state still having a mask mandate. So it just eliminated all the drama. But, in our instance, we still have this instance of saying, well, my oldest son is, he's 11. He'll turn 12 in like a week and a half. And he's my kid, so he's like, can we go on my birthday to get my vaccine? I'm like, yes, we can, buddy. But my younger son still isn't vaccinated. So in our instance, it's like, well, okay, we'll still wear masks. And, if people roll their eyes at me, I don't really give a shit. But there are plenty of people that it's intimidating. But at the same time, they don't want to go maskless yet because it's still kind of nerve-wracking to be hearing about these variants and people aren't sure if their vaccine is still going to work by fall. It's a bit of a mess, and it really would have been great to have some kind of verification system in place.
Yeah, well, get a verification system.
Exactly. That came with its own headaches about can you, the vaccine passport idea, who's going to issue these? Are they valid? Can a business really say, show me your vaccine card because that's medical information? The whole thing was quite fraught. And it just, to me, I never quite understood all the fuss. It's a piece of cloth over your face. It's not a big deal. I still have to wear a bra without that my boobs don't hurt anybody.
You don't. So you don't know that. First of all, you don't know who you.
That's true. I'm making assumptions. I am making assumptions.
Yeah, but I like to ridicule firefighters who wear fireproof clothing. I like to stand outside firefighters and call them weak.
Exactly. What a bunch of snowflakes. I mean, it's just absurd.
Snowflakes, get in there without your fire suit. I don't know why I need to use a Boston accent. Let me ask you, though, about, you mentioned you're trying
to make me feel at home.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned your child getting vaccinated, and you and a whole bunch of other physicians, this is kind of a trend on Twitter, saying that they're getting their children vaccinated, their kids' age. And I think that's a super important thing, because the thing that makes me feel safest with getting my daughter vaccinated is knowing that my friends who are physicians, and also really good friends whose I trust them with my life, and I trust them with my daughter's life. They both happen to have daughters. You know what? If these guys are getting their daughters who are similar age vaccinated, then I don't need to do any research on my own, because they do research for a living. And Meghan, I don't think I love my daughter more than they love theirs. And so to me, that was, I thought, really important, and that you and other physicians were doing that. But to those who have concern about their kids age, I guess 12 and up, getting vaccinated, what do you say at this point?
What haven't I said? I don't know. And what haven't we all said? I'm
well,
glad
we don't know the long-term effects on fertility is a convincing thing that Tucker Carlson said and others have said.
No, he doesn't say that. He just asks questions.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just asking questions and then leaving my mouth partly open.
Questions, and with my befuddled expression. But
he's such an asshole.
He really is. But just to go back for a second, I'm so glad that that's how you interpreted all of those statements, because that's exactly why we do it. Because if people are looking at, someone like me or someone like whoever they see on the news, whoever they hear on a podcast, and saying, why should I believe you? What if you're funded by big pharma? I'm not. I'm funded by NSF, but whatever. And why would I take your word for it? And it's sort of like, well, I'm getting my kid vaccinated. And as you point out, I love my son just as much as everybody asking the question loves their kids. And that's the part that I think that we really need to keep in front of our mind, even though it can be hard, is that when people ask questions about vaccines, Tucker Carlson notwithstanding, when it comes to getting their kids vaccinated, almost always it's coming from a good place. It's coming from a loving place. It's coming from a place of wanting to be assured that their kid is going to be safe. And so if you keep that perspective in mind, it helps. It helps you be less crabby.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember the first time Dr. Aaron Carroll said on the radio show about, these years ago, someone brought up the conspiracies, and they're still around, obviously, that there are cures to horrible diseases, but that they don't want to share them with us because they make billions off of the treatment of those diseases. If they cure a disease, they can no longer make billions off of the treatment. And it's a pretty convincing narrative for people who haven't heard an alternative narrative or aren't that educated.
Oh, sure.
And Aaron was like, well, doctors' kids get cancer.
Right.
Like, if there were if there were a cure, they would be yelling. They would be screaming. They would use it to cure their kids. So it's I'll never forget how convincing that was and how stupid I felt that I hadn't really thought of that. But if there was some major conspiracy, it would mean that, all these physicians, scientists don't love their own kids or themselves, Or
themselves. I was just going to say, or themselves, they get cancer too. And that would be, that's exactly, I think, the right approach, just that we're all humans. And if we remember we're all humans, it makes conversation easier. Again, Tucker Carlson notwithstanding.
Right. Not all, not Marjorie Taylor Greene. Not with. What about though there's another concern that people have is that these vaccines weren't studied long enough. They were rushed out. And how do you generally take that one?
Yeah. No. So I think that's a really, really, really fair question.
Yep.
Because we have never seen this happen on this timescale. And that's been discussed a lot as a positive in a way, like, look how well we did this and look what an achievement this was. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that narrative is that it did leave this question of, well, if you can do this fast, why doesn't everything happen this fast? Therefore, the things that are carefully studied that were done slowly must have been more thorough. So there are actually, this is a question with like kind of a multifaceted answer. The first thing that I think is important to share, that there's zero reason on the planet why most people would be aware of this unless you are a nerd such as myself that works in this line of business. The platform of mRNA vaccines, which, these are the first ones licensed and we've never seen that before. That's not new technology.
Moderna and Pfizer.
Right. That's not new technology. They have been, particularly the scientists at BioNTech that partnered with Pfizer to make their vaccine, mm-hmm. and scientists at the NIAID, that's the branch of the NIH that Tony Fauci runs. They partnered with Moderna to make theirs. These guys, those research groups have been working on mRNA-based vaccines for more than a decade. And they had these worked out in animal models. They had these wonderful platforms, and and I think we talked about this like 112 years ago or so it feels, but I remember saying that I had hope about this Moderna vaccine because they had this platform where all they had to do was just switch out the gene that was being expressed for a platform that they'd already made. And so it would be kind of akin to, you have a sugar cookie recipe, and right now you're using Halloween cookie cutters because it's October, and you can use the same recipe in December, but you just use like Santa cookie cutters. But you already know how to make the cookies. You're just changing the shape. And so I remember saying, I'm pretty confident about that one because these guys know how to do this already, because they already worked out the technology for SARS and MERS vaccines. It's just there was never a market for them. So they never sought FDA approval. They just made all these beautiful animal models that work great. And they did 1 or 2 human trials, but there was no company willing to say, yeah, I'm going to produce that and give it to people, because no one would want to buy those because people don't really get SARS and MERS very frequently. In the case of SARS, no one's had it since 2008. I think there was a laboratory exposure, and that was it. So the technology really isn't new. It's just that unless you happen to have this extremely specialized line of work, you would never have known about it because no one really talked about it. So,
along the lines, that's very well explained, and I like the analogy, although I might suggest picking a different holiday that doesn't have subtle religious undertones for the cookie cutters from Santa. And then
I apologize. Feel free to Valentine's Day it if you like.
Well, St. Valentine and Halloween is the Devil's Day, and conspiracists are going to see. No,
I am Irish, so I'm going to say shamrock cookies.
Well done.
Okay.
So let me ask you about another. I should have told you I wanted to talk about this, but just recently a friend of mine, my buddy Alex, who I grew up with, who is a virologist studying mosquitoes and mosquito-borne diseases. Am I saying it right? He's an infectious disease guy.
You got it perfect.
Working for the state of New York. And he told me the other day, when I saw him for the first time in a year, when we went hiking together, and he said something about Lyme disease and a vaccine that had an issue but got really bad publicity, and now we don't have a Lyme's vaccine. And then you tweeted something about that, and I should have asked you ahead of time. What was he talking about? What are you talking about?
Yes. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Oh, good. Because I had no idea about this. I kept meaning to ask him and look it up, and now I've got you.
So essentially, in the late 90s, there was a vaccine called Lymerix that was licensed by GlaxoSmithKline, or their parent at the time. I keep losing track of who owns who and mergers and all that. But now the company that owns the patent is GlaxoSmithKline. And essentially what happened was they went through all the clinical trials. Everything looked great. They licensed the vaccine. It doesn't sell super well because I'm not sure your frame of reference, but in the late 90s, Lyme disease was not a huge talking point. It wasn't something that very many people knew or cared much about. Part of that was probably that it was very underdiagnosed because the diagnostic test sucked and continues to suck. But the other piece to that is we didn't have quite the level of tick infestation that we have now.
They're just
gotten much worse.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so we had this vaccine and it was licensed, but it wasn't selling that well. And then on top of that, what happened was there were some reports that went to, that went to the vaccine adverse event notification where patients would say, well, I'm getting this sudden onset arthritis. And it was after I got that Lyme disease vaccine. And so what ended up happening at that point was some people looked at the genetics of it and said, well, I could see where part of this vaccine has a gene sequence that's kind of similar to certain human HLA types. In other words, people with a certain genetic background. And I bet that's causing them to have an autoimmune arthritis. And so then companies, the company and also the NIH conducted a bunch of studies where they then did exactly what is being referred to now, I think in the tweet that I mentioned with COVID vaccines and myocarditis, where they said, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at, hundreds of thousands of vaccinated people and hundreds of thousands of non-vaccinated people. And we're going to compare the rate at which these two groups get sudden onset arthritis. And when they did that, it turned out that it was exactly the same rate in those two groups. So really the vaccine, if the vaccine were causing people to get this autoimmune arthritis, you would have expected the rate to be much higher in the vaccinated group. And it wasn't any different. And so that study has actually been repeated a whole bunch of times. The outcome doesn't really change. But that being said, after a few years, that story had really taken hold. And so most people believed it. So this vaccine that already wasn't selling very well really just kind of fell off a cliff and nobody wanted it. So GSK just stopped producing it. And so exactly what would you give to get a Lyme vaccine right now?
It's crazy because it was such a throw. I'd never heard anything about it. And Alex and I were just literally walking down the trail, Megan, and he goes, yeah. And don't get me started on what we could have prevented with Lyme's and the vaccine.
Absolutely.
And I was like, wait, what? There was a vaccine for Lyme because it is something.
Yes, there was.
I don't get paranoid about, well, anything. I really don't. I don't think I get irrational about anything, including Lyme's. I don't. But I think about it more than certain other things because I'm outside all day, every day in the garden. And so I think,
same
I live in,
we love
where
being
I live.
Outside and we have the dogs and the kids. I am pulling so many ticks off of so many beings in my house. It's not even funny. So it's all the time. And it's not just Lyme disease too. It's ehrlichiosis and babesia and all these other things.
I haven't even heard of those and I haven't heard of those and I don't want to.
Please don't tell me about them.
Well, when we first moved here, we had a lot more and then we started spraying and we haven't sprayed every year consistently. But I think the thing that has brought down, and I have no idea, I'm totally making this up. This is coming straight from my ass, ladies and gentlemen, but we put up a fence around our property and they're so often traveling on the deer that would have been on our property, and now that we have tons of deer. I think that's their main form of public transportation, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, all critters, but especially the deer. But I just wonder if a fence helped us at all.
Deer and mice.
Oh,
it may have. It depends on how big your yard is. So they go long distances on deer. And where I live, moose, not to be outdone by deer.
Did you see what she did, everybody?
I went up to you with the moose. I moosed
right
you.
up and moosed me. Huh. Nothing wrong with white-tailed deer. Everybody, you could go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. It's not very often that,
you get to moose somebody. No, I understand.
Yeah, you got to take your opportunities for moosing whenever you can. So,
this is getting filthy and inappropriate, and I'm offended. I don't know what's happening.
And this isn't even the part where the no pants, sign was invoked. So
that's true.
See, we didn't have to worry about being funny. It just happened.
It just happens with us.
It just happens. Anyway, the point of that was if they get long distances on their cervid of choice, and when you're talking about a tick that you find like just off your porch or something like that, that's usually coming off of a mouse. So one of the things that, if you're kind of like aging hipster like myself, one of the things that we do in our yard, I heard that claim this morning on, it was either Colbert or Seth Meyers, I don't know, but they said like, we see all these people in Nirvana shirts and they're aging hipsters, and they were talking about the band, and I was like, hey, I still have a Nirvana shirt.
Well, now I know exactly how I'll be promoting your appearance on Stand Up with Pete Dominic.
Yeah, aging hipster.
You got it. It's done.
Hashtag aging hipster.
Done.
Anyway, the point being, so we use something called tick tubes, which are, you can buy them at a hardware store, but you can also just make them yourself. It's pretty straightforward. The idea is you put any kind of like cottony, fluffy stuff that mice would want to make nests out of. So you use like dryer lint or just cotton balls or whatever, and you spray permethrin on it, and then you stuff it like either in a paper towel tube or a toilet paper tube, whatever, and just put it on the edge of the woods. And so what happens is all the mice in your yard just grab the netting, or the batting. It doesn't hurt the mice, but they make their nests out of it. So then the mice have essentially have permethrin all over them. So when ticks bite them, they die. And so then they don't come into your yard. They actually work really well.
Is there any science behind that? That sounds awesome.
Yes, it's basically the little creature that brings them so close to your house and into your yard, the mice, you're basically bathing them in bug spray so that they die before they get to you. It's great.
See, I get why a Promethean works, and I've read about that. And if you're, a serious camper and stuff, is spraying it on your clothes apparently is a really smart thing to do. But I guess my question was how that works is, and where I place them, because I'm going to do it, is where do the mice get them? Where do the mice find the tube? That's what I look up. You'll send me YouTube videos. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there are. This could be one of the best pieces of advice we get from you today. So that's important.
I know, and it was
valuable.
about Lyme disease.
Yeah, no, it's important. I'm glad I asked. Well, I have two more things I want to get to before I got to go, and I want to make sure you have to go, and I want to make sure I hit them. So we've got to talk about your thoughts on the story regarding which you've been closely following the possible, what are we calling it, the Wuhan laboratory leak, and what that means about, Dr. Fauci or science in general and gain of function and blah, blah, blah. You've got some great thoughts, and you're quoting and retweeting others who have great thoughts on this. I read through a lot of it. It's really confusing, Megan, but people really, want to. There is, let's be clear, there is controversy in the world of science amongst experts when it comes to the way that certain type of research is done. I'm being super general, but it does happen that virologists or infectious disease experts have a disagreement on the way research is done, especially on infectious diseases. So what do we need to know? Bring it way, way down to my level.
Aw, your level is a delightful place to hang out.
Yeah, for a little while. Then you got to go back to academia.
I spend 90% of my time there, and I really enjoy it.
Yes.
But so I think the first thing to really get a grasp on is that, so you mentioned the term gain of function research, and I think it's important that we all get kind of on the same page about what that means, because it's a term that a lot of people have started throwing around once this lab leak story started circulating. And it's something that a lot of people think they know what it means, but it's not exactly clear. So gain of function research is a type of study that's done when people study how emerging pathogens evolve, like how they jump into a new species and then how they change and adapt once they get there, which we all can, I think, agree that SARS-CoV-2, the agent of COVID, has recently made that jump and it's in the process of adapting itself to us. Mm-hmm. So essentially, kind of the most basic way to think about this is if you took a random virus X, and you wanted to see this currently replicates only in dogs. Can I pressure this on an evolutionary level to start replicating in humans? So which I know sounds kind of wacky, but that's kind of the idea. What you would want to do is you would have it in a laboratory, you would feed it to some dog cells, and you would have it replicating quite happily where it's in the background, it's evolved to replicate in, and then you would slowly start introducing it to human cells and see, well, which of the billions of viruses that get produced by each infection, is there one or two that are going to be able to have enough changes where they can jump in and infect that human cell? And then those ones become the ones that are the billion that replicate. And now of that billion, how many of them can replicate in a different type of human cell? And all along the way, you would be looking at those intermediate phases and sequencing them and doing all kinds of kind of binding tests to see, well, what about that virus changed as it went from being only able to replicate in dog cells to then being able to replicate in human cells. So you could kind of see, when you're doing this in a laboratory setting, you could see that there's a bit of a danger associated with that, right? Because if you're taking something that currently doesn't infect human cells and giving it the capacity to do that you're risking, could that then infect the people who are working in the lab with it or their loved ones or whatever?
Or could it be weaponized?
Right. Or if you then publish that, if you change A, B, and C about this type of virus, it can now replicate in humans and, perhaps spread from human to human. And you've just given, a terrorist with nefarious intentions a nice, recipe for how to create some sort of weapon. So
or a government.
Or a government or whoever. So that was essentially kind of the ethical questions about this. One of the issues was one of the scientists who ran a coronavirus lab at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, she had previously published this type of research. And the part of the story that gets a little bit left out here is that when she published that paper, and this was in 2015, I believe, there was this enormous outcry in the scientific community where people said, you can't do that. That should be banned. And if you do that, for God's sake, don't publish it. And so essentially in answer to that research group continued to do that type of work where they wanted to see what changes make something able to infect, this new species versus that new species. And the point of that isn't to make weapons. The point of that is so that you can understand what changes are necessary for a pathogen to emerge so that you can then start swabbing wildlife and looking for potential viruses that could emerge in the human population. So it has a good purpose, but it does have an inherent risk to it. So what that research group started to do instead was they would do the same type of research, but they would use replication deficient viruses so that if a change were made, they would make it so that that virus, if it were taken out of a laboratory, would not have the capacity to replicate in a living person or a living, cat, dog, moose, whatever.
Right. Did it again.
Throwback. So essentially that became the standard practice after that outcry that happened 6 years ago. So that's a piece of the story that often doesn't get mentioned in the news articles, that no, there was this outcry and here was the remediative step that was taken to make it safer. So there's that. It doesn't eliminate the possibility that, because a neighboring lab was actually doing a lot of research on bat coronaviruses where they were swabbing bats and sequencing them and seeing, what coronaviruses existed in nature. And so you could have a lab that is growing coronaviruses that naturally occurred. So this again would at this point have nothing to do with gain of function research that, could one of those have escaped? And so that's a different question. But for me, I'm glad you saw kind of some of those other threads because they really looked at it from a journalistic standpoint, which I have zero experience with. But what they were saying to me, made a lot of sense where, they were saying that essentially the Wall Street Journal was presenting something as a document from the intelligence community, but it really wasn't, or it certainly hadn't been verified that that's what that was.
Read who's Pawn of All the Things. That was a really good thread. Or just go to Megan's because Dr. MAY5 for more on this. But you put it succinctly on Twitter about in terms of your thoughts on that this could have been a leak. Where now I can't find that tweet.
Right. No, I'd be happy to summarize it because I remember what I was thinking, which doesn't always happen. But I liked that thread because it approached it very much from a it evaluated the journalism of it, which I was in no way qualified to do. But what I could add to that was, here are the things that clinically and scientifically make me also question, that this was a lab leak in origin. And the thing is, the Wall Street Journal piece in particular made quite a bit of hay out of the idea of, oh my gosh, 3 laboratory workers from the Wuhan Institute of Virology were hospitalized for treatment in November. And kind of the implication there, though they don't say it, is obviously they infected themselves at work and they had to be hospitalized. And so clearly this kind of demonstrates that they were, growing this in the lab and at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And that's, it was very much a leading headline. But to me, I think I'm in no way, shape, or form alone in my profession in being incredibly confident in the conclusion that while the Chinese government has acknowledged the first COVID case was the first week of December, most of us are absolutely convinced that it was circulating well before that. In all probability, when we do things like you can do some math based on how fast the virus seems to be mutating, and then you can kind of calculate back how long has it been circulating in the population based on that. And so those types of calculations, plus when you look at kind of reports of epidemiological data, when do you see an uptick in respiratory illness and that kind of thing? August or September, certainly this was circulating. And so I look at this, just objectively from the standpoint of, okay, the Wuhan Institute of Virology has 40 independent labs. Each independent lab is run by one person, and it's going to have staff of probably, let's be very conservative, let's say 3 people each, right? So that's almost 150 people right there. In a city of 14 million people where you have virus circulating, to have 3 of 150 people needing to be hospitalized, like that's like about the background rate that you'd expect. That's not an incredible. That just to me feels like that's just community spread.
That's very interesting. And you say very succinctly. Here's a tweet. It was a few tweets, and this was the last one. You say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. While such evidence may exist, this ain't it. And that is, I think, the final word. At this point, until there's more evidence. And that's why I love talking to you about this. So well explained.
The reason why it's so dangerous is, and you can find little glimpses of this throughout the pandemic of people saying, why is everyone handling China with kid gloves, right? Clearly there was not transparency at the beginning. Clearly the situation would have been far more controllable if there had been. And I agree and sympathize with all of that. And I know you and I talked about the idea of clearly that we're not getting the truth from these guys right now, because the actions they're taking don't match up with the information that they're admitting to publicly. And I agree with all of that. And they are not an easy partner to work with. However, the other piece to that you have to remember, and why I don't envy the WHO having to conduct this investigation, is that if you say to them, we think you did this on purpose, this is all your fault, and you're liable for all this death and destruction, and you're going to have to pay for it, what is going to happen? They're going to kick your inspectors out. They're going to lock the door. And the next time this happens, you're not even going to find out about it a few months after the fact. You're going to find out about it way later,
important. Yep.
When it's way too late.
Yep.
And China also contributes to their budget, which is another whole, that's like a practical reality. But more importantly is right now you get minimal cooperation. You will get no cooperation. And 1 billion people live there. And so many emerging pathogens pop out in China. And you cannot have them just kicking out the inspectors and locking the door. That will, the next time this happens, it will be so much worse.
And it will happen. Yeah.
And it will happen.
So
exactly.
well explained. I am so happy that you were available to talk to me today. I so enjoy our conversations, and I hope everybody goes and reads your Twitter feed, and I will talk to you soon. Dr. Meghan May, thank you.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Dr. Meghan May, everyone. Thank you, Meghan, for joining me. Always fun. That was a great, fun conversation. I learned so much from our discussions. Go follow her on Twitter, drmay5. drmay5. Tell her you love when she joins me here on Stand Up. You appreciate the lessons and the learnings. ScienceandStories.com, Dr. Meghan May. Okay, now it's time to get to my second guest on today's program. It's your favorite, my favorite constitutional law scholar. It's Professor Eric Siegel. He tweets at eSpinSiegel. He's been very good on the Twitter lately. He blogs at Dorf on Law. We talked about a couple of his recent blog entries on Dorf on Law today. He is also, of course, a professor at the Georgia State University down in Atlanta, where he is married to Lynn, his kids, Katie and Sarah and Jesse. He is a really good friend of mine. We always have great conversations. And this conversation was not so much about law, but about society and culture. He had a great blog post at Dorf on Law titled Pro Fetus but Anti-Life, the Sorry State of Child and Family Care in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Siegel, the Legal Eagle. All right, he is here now, Professor Eric Siegel. I feel like we could do another podcast called Guns and Abortion someday.
Yeah, I've done a lot of guns on my podcast, with Clark Nelly, who you've talked to before, and other people. But yes, guns. And you know what, Pete? We shouldn't even be talking about guns and abortion. But anyway, we have to. So.
Well, I just want to ask you, because I didn't even look it up. I knew I was talking to you, and I was hoping you'd just be able to explain this. I don't even want to think about it. This law in Texas about.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
That yesterday this broke. I actually interviewed Shannon Watts from Mom's Demand for the show yesterday, and then I found out.
It's a great organization. It's a great organization.
Yeah, they're awesome. But then I found out about this, so I didn't get the chance to ask her, and I still haven't totally read in. Let me get the headlines. Constitutional carry bill heads to the governor's desk. Texans could carry handguns without a permit under a bill headed to the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott's desk. What? How do you?
Well, before I respond to this, let's be clear here that I am not, as I've said to you many times, a gun policy expert. I actually know more than I used to know about it, but I don't hold myself out as anyone who can like argue with Clark Nelly of Cato about gun rights in terms of the policy of it. Like what they're doing is clearly constitutional. There's no constitutional issue. Georgia, Texas could allow all guns everywhere, any place, anytime. It's up to them, unless the federal government were to get involved. But it seems to me as a layperson that the idea of anyone having a handgun anytime, anywhere, any place, for any reason, without any permitting, has to be one of the dumbest things ever. But that's just me.
The without any permitting is the big, because right now that's the development, I think. Anybody in Texas, especially, everybody's got a gun, but they also are they've got a permit which says that they have some minimal safety training, and you can trace that gun back to that person. If you want to carry a gun around your hip, you can, but you gotta, like a car, get a license. I think
after this bill, I thought after this bill, handguns can.
Yeah,
right.
After this bill, it sounds like you don't. After this bill, it sounds like anybody can just fucking get a pistol and just walk.
So I will tell you what this reminds me of. And this is not the issue we were going to talk about, although it is related. It's definitely related to the abortion issue we're going to talk about. But what this feels like to me is exactly the same thing. And I'm sorry, it's going to be a weird connection at first. After the Supreme Court, without any support in text, history, or law, struck down the Medicaid part of the Affordable Care Act in 2012. Everybody always says the court upheld the Obamacare.
Yeah.
It did, but it also struck down a big part of the act, which was this part of the act that required states, if they wanted federal money, to cover people 133% above the poverty level. And the Supreme Court struck that down. And then Texas and 23 or 4, don't hold me to it, other red states turned down the federal Medicaid money, which left this huge hole in their coverage for people who are not the poorest of the poor, but still incredibly poor. And they did that knowing it was terrible public policy, knowing people would die. I'm serious about that. Knowing people would die. They did it to show their political stripes. They did it as, we're a red state, we hate Obama, fuck you, and we're going to show you, we're going to flex our muscles and not cover our own people. This feels, and Abbott, the governor of Texas, is as bad as they come. And this feels like that. Like, we're going to send a political message. We'll do what the hell we want. We're Texas. We love our guns here. And we don't care about the policy. We just want to show you how red we are. Oh, God, it drives me crazy.
By the way, a solid majority of Texas voters don't think permitless carry should be allowed, including a solid majority of Republicans. No. I'm wrong about that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's 56% say yes of Republicans, and 39% say no. But overall, it's 34% say yes in Texas. These are Texans. So
I wrote a piece last week about guns, and what I said about it was a historical piece, because whatever the answer to gun safety versus gun rights ought to be, whatever that answer is, I'm not an expert on that. Whatever that answer is, the Supreme Court seems to think, or federal courts, seem to think, you go back in history and you look. 1791 or 1868, pick whichever, because that's the date that the 14th Amendment made the Second Amendment applicable to the states. Whichever one you think is relevant. It's like comparing there's no comparisons. New York had 33,000 people in 1791. It has 8 million today. It took 30 seconds to load a gun in 1791, and you could shoot one time. Today you can kill, the notion. So this Texas law.
Yeah, you're right in that piece. America in 1791 was largely agrarian society ruled by local governments, where rifles and other arms were expensive, hard to use, and could only do limited damage.
No, I'm quoting other people for that, because of course I am not, but I'm quoting very reliable sources for that, and no one's called me out on it. No one has said no, Siegel. Even gun nuts haven't said that. But here's the thing: I just can't imagine a world. Imagine, let's do it this way. Imagine having James Madison here and saying, "Mr. Madison, there's going to come a time in America's future when you can hide an ARM, in your pocket, take it out, and kill 5 people in 3 minutes or whatever.
That's not a future I would like to live in.
Right. Did you think we should let anybody do that?
Dolly!
Do you want slaves doing that, by the way? I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean...
All right, well, let's talk now about abortion, because that's what we were planning to talk about. And more important...
Well, actually, not really abortion. I want to talk more about...
You're right. It's how do we describe it? The title of this piece, Pro-Fetus, but Anti-Life. The sorry state of child and family care in the United States. Let's just first take a look at the kind of the moral argument that a lot of people make, certainly a lot of liberals make, against the anti-abortion folks, which say, you are against abortion, but you're for the death penalty. Take that first, as you do in this article.
I hate that argument.
Yeah,
no, I disclaim that argument. I think it is very consistent for someone to say, I think the fetus is an innocent human being that deserves protection from the law. And I think people who commit, certain kinds of horrific crimes should forfeit their rights to live based on those horrific crimes, as long as they're given notice, due process, all that stuff. Now, of course, in our country, the death penalty is so racially discriminatory that no sensible person that I've ever met thinks we should still have it until we fix it so that it's not racially discriminatory. But there's nothing inconsistent with being anti-abortion and pro-death penalty. I don't use that argument. I don't find it persuasive. I have no time for it.
And also, I have heard plenty of very conservative Christians be consistent on it and say, I'm against the death penalty and abortion. So,
but that's fine. That's like saying I like chocolate cake and I like lobster. I mean, they're two very different. I do like chocolate cake and I do like lobster, but they're completely different things.
They're not. They're gross to think about together right now. I'm not going to lie. I heard that lobsters are really expensive right now. I think there's a lobster, I read a headline, lobster roll, $34. It can't be right.
Because I freaking love lobster.
Yeah, me too.
2 summers ago, Lynn and I went to Maine 3 summers ago.
Oh, great.
Went to Maine for 10 days. I ate lobster omelets, lobster rolls, and occasionally lobster for dinner for like 8 straight days.
I've always wanted to go out with a lobsterman one day on his boat. I used to wait by
Billy Joel has written about that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway. Going back to your piece at Dorf on Law, this is what you did is you studied up and took a look at what is the sorry state, as you say, of child and family care in the United States. And it's a great piece to learn. If you haven't ever thought about this, Siegel certainly has for this piece. It's great. How do we start?
Well, so let me just say, I began by having a general intuition that we're pretty terrible on these issues, but I didn't know for sure. I hadn't really studied it, with data and things. And I don't normally write blog posts that way. I normally write about stuff I already know about. It's a blog post, not an article. I'm writing 2 law review articles right now where, it takes months and I'm thinking about it. This blog post, I don't do that, but I wanted to do this one because the court just granted certiorari in the Mississippi 15-week abortion ban. They're going to uphold that. They're going to uphold that ban. It's going to make abortions illegal after 15 weeks in probably all the red states. And so I was curious what happens to the fetus once a woman is told you have no chance, you have no choice.
Just to be clear, I should have asked you that to start. The Mississippi decision is the Supreme Court announced, was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago? You've been talking about
last week.
That they're going to take an abortion case, and the prediction is that they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that red states will be able to.
No. I don't think many people are saying that. I think the more sophisticated and the more accurate view is, first so right now, it is absolutely unconstitutional to prohibit abortion before viability. It's just unconstitutional.
Right.
In fact, the Fifth Circuit, the most awful circuit court in the United States, the one that struck down Obamacare, immigration law, the one that actually upheld other abortion regulations, the Supreme Court already struck down. Even the Fifth Circuit here said, no, we have to strike this down. It clearly violates Casey. It just does. No one's arguing that law doesn't violate Casey and Roe. But I think what the court's going to do is it's going to say, okay, 15 weeks is a reasonable enough line. It's no longer viability. I actually have changed my mind on this. I think the court is not going to allow states to outlaw all first-term abortions. They might, but I don't think so. But they are going to allow this because why else would they take the case? There's no circuit split. What I mean by that is the Supreme Court normally waits until 2 court of appeals reach different results before they take cases. That's not going to happen. There is no circuit split here. And they're not going to take the case to uphold what the Fifth Circuit did. There's no point in that. They could, if they're going to uphold the law, they would have just denied cert and the law would have gone away, So they're going to reverse and they're going to make new abortion law and they're going to water down Roe and Casey dramatically. My understanding is many women, although most abortions are first-term abortions, this will cut back on many, many, many abortions. And you know what, Pete? It cuts back on the women who are 19 weeks pregnant who want to get an abortion. It's almost always because of fetal abnormality or some kind of medical condition or change in their lives. Their husband died, whatever. It's not true that women wait 19 weeks to go, now I'm going to get an abortion.
It's an insane. Just the idea that someone can believe that without asking a couple of follow-ups.
I know.
And you do hear an anecdote or two sometimes, and I know somebody who didn't. It's like, no, you don't. First of all, but anyway.
So because the court granted cert in that case, and because whatever happens in this case, we know, absent dramatic court changes between next year, between June of 2022 and let's say June of 2025, Roe and Casey are going to be mostly shriveled up. There may be some protection. I don't know. I doubt it. I think there will be, but it's going to be minimal. So then I was thinking, all right, first, what happens to the fetus and the mother and the family? And second, is there a correlation between red and blue states and what happens to the fetus, mother, and the family? And in doing that research, I learned something I didn't know, which is I'm going to read the sentence from my post because it's so absurd. The United States of America is the only industrialized country in the world with no national family paid leave policy. We're the only one. Why are we so fucking exceptional?
Because
we suck.
Because I thought about that a lot in reading an article. And I was like, I know why. It's because companies and individuals want to make as much money. It's capitalism. It just is. It's make as much money as they can. And if you force women to have to, used to be you could have one person work and you could support a family. Now both people have to work to support the family. And now even after you give birth, you better come right back to work because I'm not paying you not to work. It's just squeeze nickel and dime every penny out of every person, regardless of what it does to their lives.
In fact, as I say here, most women in America have to return to work within 10 days of giving birth.
I couldn't believe that statistic. What quarter
sorry,
you wrote?
One quarter. 1 in 4. 25%. Yeah. That's a huge number of women. Some experts, bedside experts in this piece, say that 10 weeks of paid leave after birth, 10 weeks, would reduce infant mortality by 10%. That's 10%. That's a huge number. That's not insignificant stuff. Here's some examples. Listen to these countries. Austria, Norway, Estonia, sounds like a fake country, Bulgaria, Hungary, Japan, Slovakia, Latvia, and Slovenia provide 40 weeks or more of paid maternity leave as a national thing. 40 weeks, almost a year. Sweden, Germany, Finland, Luxembourg, Poland, Czech Republic, Croatia. Same thing. Most countries give between 10 and 40. We give 0. Now, there are 10 states in our country that have very minimal paid maternity leave policies. Only 7 have implemented them. 9 states in District of Columbia. All 9 states that did it voted blue in the last election, and 7 are reliably blue. 2 are Colorado, which I assume is a swing state sometimes. I don't know where Washington State and Oregon stand. I think they're mostly blue, but I'm not sure. But the rest are California, New York, New Jersey, what you'd expect. And guess what, Pete? Those are the states where women are going to be able to get abortions once Roe and Casey are done with. And there's not a single consistent red state that gives any paid maternity leave, requires paid maternity leave. So that got me thinking, it's like the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
We force women to carry, and families, to carry fetuses to term against their will, and then we offer them absolutely no support. And that is just crazy. And then I was thinking, you said it was capitalism earlier, and I agree that's a big part of it. There's another slice of it, though, that I think you're going to agree with. In some respects, not all certainly, we are the most sexist free nation in the world.
Yeah.
We are the only constitutional democracy in the world without a provision in our Constitution guaranteeing equal rights based on
but
gender.
there are other countries that are just as sexist or more sexist, but they understand how public policy is more effective, and so they. I said earlier it's just about capitalism, but the truth is you could have all kinds of right. You could pass any kind of law you want, forcing a company to do whatever. And as you mentioned, in blue states, they do have those laws.
Some blue states.
But it's just this idea. It's a concept. It's the idea. Right. It's an ignorance of economics, really.
We don't have to speculate about this. So France, and I'm not a big fan of France, but France.
Why not?
I have a great story about France.
You're also not a big fan of Estonia. You mentioned you didn't even believe it. 1.3 million people live in that country. It's a developed country. It's NATO.
I do have a great France story for some time. But anyway, a personal story. But anyway, in France, the government provides very affordable municipal daycare, tax breaks for families employing in-home childcare workers. They have universal free preschool beginning at age 3. Do you know how much that would help America?
I know. Well, I've talked to early childhood experts and education experts about this. And the most shocking and important statistic is when you go through some kind of universal pre-K early childhood education, when you have that experience, when you're 18, the odds of you having more success are phenomenal. And it's not just a
sense, right?
correlation.
That makes sense.
For sure. Yes. Well, if you understand that that's when kids' minds are developing. If you understand anything about early childhood education, of course it makes sense. It's an economic. It's a great idea.
Right.
But we're punitive. We're punitive.
One more thing France does is that their government-run daycare centers are open from 7:30 in the morning to either 7 or 8 at night, and there's a sliding scale where you pay based on how much money you earn. Now, here's the point I want to make about all that. It seems to me that our ultimate goal, our country, everybody's ultimate goal in this area of things should be, if women or men want to raise children at home, they should be able to, and the government should help. Or if women want to go back to work, they should be able to, and the government should be able to help. And government-run daycare that's good, and 50% of the workers here are required to have specialized diplomas in childcare and things like that. We have enough money for that, Pete. I wonder sometimes. I would love to know. I didn't do this research. I'd love to know what it costs France per year to offer that daycare compared to what we spend in Afghanistan in a week.
Well, I was thinking about this. All these European countries and Japan and other countries have gotten America to pay for their defense in many ways. They don't have to have the defense budgets because they know that we'll protect them, which is really duping us because what they've said, you know what? The Japanese said, let's surrender. And we'll have to be really, really damaging to our pride and our culture and so on. But we'll convince them to protect us and spend billions on defense. Meanwhile, we'll have an amazing social safety net and have much better quality of life. I'm just making shit up. But the truth is we spend so much on defense, which again is, jobs in every single congressional district in every state. And that therein lies the politics for that. But in terms of how much we spend we could still absolutely cover it if we changed all kinds of things with tax policies and economic incentives. And I do want to mention also a lot of private companies, including those in red states, do offer amazing benefits for women who get pregnant. You just have to be a higher up or have to have a quality education to get a job at one of those companies. It's not most women. That's the problem. It's companies attracting employees with these ideas, but they should be mandated.
But Pete, we and this goes back to your capitalism point, although I might call it hyper-capitalism. Because France is capitalist. They have private industry that makes a lot of money and stuff. Our national laws define who we are as a people and what our priorities are. And not only does our national constitution not have a provision guaranteeing equal rights for women, the only democratic constitution in the world that does not do that. Not only do we not have that, but without any national concern for maternity leave, for parental leave, for paternity leave, for childcare, what we're saying is those first 5, 8, 10 years of life, we don't care. It's just it's an absurd way to define ourselves. Every 3-year-old should be able to go to a government daycare center
Not
if
radical.
their parents want to work.
Not radical. Although someone said to me on Twitter, that would just be more government indoctrination. I'm like, really?
Right, I saw that.
Did you?
Jesus
Yeah, because
Christ.
I thought about that. I still think about it because that person's not necessarily wrong. Because what does nursery school, what does preschool teach kids? It teaches them not to hit. It teaches them to share. It teaches them not to bully and
Don't call names. Yeah, exactly.
Those are apparently now, I thought those were universal ideas for humans. Trump breaks all those rules.
So I almost wrote this. So I wrote this blog post for my... Don't
cheat?
This blog post is more mechanical than I usually write. It's full of data and numbers.
Yeah, I did a lot of
lists.
research on that.
I set out to... I'm thinking about writing a different one that is more along these lines. We just fucking hate women in this country. And we've always have.
Yeah.
This... So you and I have talked about this many times.
Not only in this country. You mentioned a country's laws define how they feel. In this case, we're talking about gender, but and you also touched on this. So does a budget. A budget is a moral document. A company's budget, a state budget, a federal budget. Right. But the other thing is, which you've talked about and are really an expert on, and I love on, is religion. And I mean, there's no thou shalt not rape. I think I'm only not allowed to covet my neighbor's wife.
Did you cover your neighbor's wife?
No,
Aren't they really old?
Not in this neighborhood. Not right now.
With respect to Val, I'm sure.
Mine.
I was going to say, with respect to Val, I suspect all of your neighbors cover her. I hope that's okay for me to say.
She is the prettiest lady in the street.
Maybe in the state.
Hey, just insulted a lot of New Yorkers.
So wait, I want to make this serious. I want to make this.
Yes, please.
So I have speculated before on yours and many other, with you and many other people. And I really felt this way in the 90s, that the correlation between religious objections to abortion and a general anti-woman platform is very close. That and this is what I want to say about that. You and I both know, we don't have the numbers, but we know that evangelicals have just as many affairs as non-evangelicals, and that heavily religious people fuck around just as much as non-religious people. They just do. We just know this. But they want to pretend they don't.
Just likely to be gay.
It's just likely to be. Well, that we know, obviously. I mean, yes.
You're saying we know all this, but then you basically say, that one is.
You may not be as likely to engage in gay sex, but there's no. But I'm sure
you really want to,
right? But seriously, it's all one package of not allowing women to live their best lives. That's what it is. It's all one package of not allowing women to. We're saying they can't. My favorite story about this, and I've told it to you before. I want to repeat it. I was invited to a weekend by the Federalist Society, very posh weekend in Philadelphia. And they said I could bring my wife. So Lynn came, which was great. Put us up in the fanciest hotel in Philadelphia. And I spent 2 days with 11 Federalist Society true believers talking about a book that had just come out by a guy named Richard Epstein at NYU Law School, who's the most famous libertarian probably we have in academia. He's not on social media very much, but he is the most distinguished. He wants to go back to before the New Deal. He wants to go back to minimum wages are unconstitutional. Overtime rules are unconstitutional. He wants to go back to a total free market economy. And he wrote this 500-page book about that. And we talked about all the economic stuff for 2 days. He also has a chapter on abortion. And he's kind of ambivalent about it. But everyone in the room. So I spent a whole Saturday and 3/4 of a Sunday hearing liberty, freedom, freedom, liberty, freedom. I own a company. Where is the government get off telling me how much to pay my workers? I own a company. Where is the government to tell me to do well for the environment? I own my house. Where is why is the homeowner association going to tell me I can't rent my basement? Over and over again for 2 freaking days. Then we get to abortion. Oh, Roe in case you're wrong, and state should abolish, should make it illegal. And I raised my hand and I said, excuse me. I've been very respectful for this last day and 3/4, and they all nodded their heads because I had been, for me especially. I was very respectful. I disagreed with everything they said, but I was respectful. I said, but I don't understand something. For a day and a half, 3/4, you've been yelling about freedom and liberty. Can you identify to me a more important freedom than to decide what to do with your own body and your own family? And they said, no, but it's murder. And I said, well, you think it's murder, and that's a fair, reasonable belief. I don't think it's murder. You're libertarians. We're reasonably disagreeing. Why do you want the government here, but not in minimum wage laws and overtime laws and pollution laws? And everybody looked at me like I was from Mars. I was like, what is more important than controlling your own body and your own family destiny? What's more important than maybe one thing?
My estate and my legacy, sir. And my boat. Well, wait, I thought that's crazy. What did they say? And I thought most libertarians were pro-choice.
No, well,
not at that conference, apparently.
Maybe most libertarians 30 years ago were pro-choice. They had no answer other than it's murder. Then it's reasonable for a state to conclude that it's murder. And I say, isn't it reasonable for a state to conclude that we live in a better country if corporations have to pay a minimum wage? No, that violates their rights. You have a right to, and I say, where is in the Constitution where it says you have the right to pay your employee a minimum wage? I mean, to any wage you want. Is the word employee in the Constitution? I mean, where do you find that? Oh, it's in this principle and that principle and that principle. And I go, well, wait a minute. We have all kinds of liberty words in the Constitution and all kinds. We can extrapolate many things, but employer-employee is not in the Constitution, and neither is abortion. But one is protected and one isn't. What are you talking about?
One of the things that I've learned from you over the years is a lot about women's history and feminism, and the woman that raised you, your mom, and you've told me who to read and introduced me to a lot of amazing, brilliant women and feminists. But I feel like when it comes to women's liberation and feminism, it's never very challenging for me to understand where feminists are coming from simply by saying they just want what I have.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. My mom died 4 years ago at 83. So, in 19, I don't know, I can't do math, but she was having women's consciousness raising groups in 1970, 71, 72. When I was 13, 14, 15, it affected me a lot. The Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem eras. But what I remember, Pete, I don't have a lot of memories of that. I know I have emotional currents from it, but I don't have a lot of memories. But one memory that's very clear in my mind is that these women saying, it's not that we want women to work. It's not that we want women to make we're not saying what choices they should make. We just think they should have the choice 100% of the way. My mom was a big believer that actually, believe it or not, she was a definite feminist. She was a big believer that there was something, I don't believe this, that there was something to the idea of kind of a natural destiny for women and mothers. My mom was born in 1928. She had that belief. But what was stronger than that, and that's what she chose. My mom graduated number one.
Meaning
in high
what?
School
like
class.
Meaning a natural.
I'm going to explain it. I'm going to explain it. My mom graduated number one in her high school class. Then she went to McGill College and University, which is the best college in Canada. Met my dad. My mom's grades were off the charts. My dad's grades were good. They get married. My dad becomes an incredibly successful businessman. My mom raises 3 kids and stays home. And I know there was a part of her that wished she had been born in a different time. Because in 1960, 62, there weren't a lot of women leaving their families to go work, unless they had to economically, and she didn't. But my point here is, as strongly as she kind of, in some ways, this is kind of personal, resented my dad's success because she could have been just as successful, because she's that smart. My dad would say that, today. He would say, my dad says my mom's much smarter than he is. But more than that, she believed in choice. Society should not judge whatever a woman chooses when it comes to either raising kids full-time, raising kids part-time, not raising kids at all and getting the daycare or child, whatever it is. The idea is women, if you really believe in freedom and liberty, then you would believe that women should make whatever choices they want, and that includes terminating a pre-viable fetus.
If you really believe in freedom and liberty, you would simply believe in the same rights for all people with immutable characteristics. I mean,
correct. So what really depressed me about, and that's right. What really depressed me about this research.
It's not complicated.
It's not. And I know we're running up huge deficits and we're coming out of a crisis and all that stuff. What's more important than making sure that poor kids have a healthy, safe place to be? I mean, is there anything more important than that? I have a question for you. Do you think really poor people in red states who vote Republican, who are really struggling to balance taking care of their 2, 3, and 4-year-old kids, and want to work or have to work, do you think they believe that? Don't you think their lives would be easier and they would like it if they had government?
I don't know if they believe in. So often they are radicalized by the media and their church and other things. And I think if you explained it to them in a certain set of terms, I think they wouldn't disagree with it. But I think I don't know, and I won't profess what I feel like they would. I feel like if you said to them, "There's going to be a government operated daycare on the corner," and it's going to be open nights. The question could be right now: did you turn down the money you got from the government through the pandemic? Right. Did you turn it down? Right, exactly. Did you take it? No, I think, and then here's the final thing. Before we talked about things that were unrelated, like chocolate cake and lobster, like 1791 guns and 2021 guns, completely unrelated things. Here's what is related. And I want to really bring this down to the human level. If you have a woman, this is going to happen in our country, sometime between 1 year and 5 years from now. You have a woman who wants to have an abortion, and the state says, no, you can't. No, you can't. The least we could do is provide that woman with some support to take care of that kid she doesn't even fucking want. And the idea that we don't, now, I mean, there's all kinds of other arguments. Obviously, women are still going to have abortions, that it's going to be illegal abortions, and they're going to be less safe abortions and all that stuff. But leaving that aside, this is what I got into with the libertarians. You are making them do the one thing that restricts their liberty more than anything else you could possibly do, other than put them in jail, which is they don't want to bring a child into the world, and you're making them do so. The adoption argument is not a good one for 10 different reasons, but let's not get into that right now. You're making them use their body for 9 months in a way they don't want to. The least we could do is what every industrialization in the world does, which is give them some money at the beginning to make it easier. We are not that good of a people, unfortunately. Many of us are. And here's what I wonder about this. No, I'm sorry. I want to make one more point about this, and I'll let you rant for as long as you want. Lynn and I are, don't get mad at me for this. Lynn and I are rewatching West Wing from season 1. Why would I get mad at you? That's cool. It's a great show. But we're not there yet. But there's an episode where one of the lead characters is in a bar in the Midwest. And there's another guy in the bar who is an older guy, and he's kind of sad. And he tells the president's guy, I have a kid who wants to go to college, and she wants to go to Notre Dame, which is where the president went, wants to go to Notre Dame, the fake president, wants to go to Notre Dame. And I can work 2 jobs. My wife can work 2 jobs, and we can make it work, but it's going to be an incredible drain. He's obviously like a middle-class guy. It's going to be an incredible drain. Then he says this sentence, which I think is so powerful. I just wish, he said, I want to work hard. That's what I do. I wish it would be a little bit easier. Why can't we make it a little bit easier for poor people to have kids? And raise kids correctly? I'll tell you why. Because we hate them. We hate them. Poor people. Babies? No, we hate poor people. Yeah, we hate their poor babies too. Yes. You know what's interesting about that? I think poor people hate poor people. It's not just conservatives. It's not. People don't like poor people. They don't like them. They don't like people who go to prison. They don't like them. They look down on them. It makes us feel better. I don't. It reminds me of that great line. And I think that's not unique to America. What were you saying? It reminds me of that great line from 1776, a musical, which I think is a fictional line, but I think it's so accurate. That's about John Adams and, the Declaration of Independence. And there's a guy from Pennsylvania, who's against the signing of he's against it. He doesn't want to break away from England. John Dickinson. I mean, it's a real guy. And they ascribed this line to him. Most men, of course, it's 1777. So most men in America would rather protect the possibility of becoming rich than face the reality of being poor. Yeah. Yeah, we don't face the reality of poor people. We don't even believe in that we're going to die in America. We don't even have a good understanding and acceptance of the idea of death. We really think all kinds of crazy fantasies about how our lives are going to turn out. Let me just ask you I have 2 random points to make if you have time to react to both.
Before you do, I'm sorry. A really brilliant thought just peeped into my. I never said. It's the first time I've ever said that to you. That a brilliant thought just popped into my mind, but it did. We don't take care. Just something you said. We don't take care of babies, and we don't take care of old people in this country. And I think I know why that is, Pete. I do. One of the reasons, because we still have that Western mentality. I don't mean Western Hemisphere. I mean, stagecoaches and horses and going out west and discover. If you're a baby or you're an old person, you're not going to be much help in the frontier world. And it's like even in the middle of New York City, I don't know how much of that we've lost. Like there's this idea, you take care of yourself in America. You're John Wayne. You have a gun. You take care of yourself.
Yeah, rugged
it's
individualism.
A bunch of bullshit.
It's always been a canard and a myth perpetrated, and there's so much that's been said and written about it. I don't want to, but you're right. And we're. Let me just ask you these 2 points. I don't think that was that brilliant, by the way.
Say again. You broke up for a second.
I don't think it was that brilliant. That point you made.
Oh, really? I'm sad. Okay. Yeah. Well, I've made so many on your pods and shows over the years.
You certainly have. But you will have brilliant reactions to both these. First of all, they're not related. And the final things I'll say. My mom told me that I guess in the late 70s or early 80s she had to get my dad's signature to get a checking account.
Yeah, I think I actually have a vague memory of my mom going through something similar. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
And number two, if it is made illegal or very difficult to get an abortion, I guess it'd be illegal in red states, there is going to be an amazing number of programs and volunteers who will say to any woman who lives in a state where they can't get an abortion, we will come get you and pay for it all. Won't
I
there
hope
be?
So, Pete. I hope so. I don't know. I hope so. I have a different solution to that. I don't know. I mean, yes, I hope that happens. And so I think I've mentioned to you before.
I mean, it won't work. It'll never work to outlaw abortions. It's just...
That's correct.
Impossible.
That's correct.
I mean, soon you can. In Ireland, before they legalized them or abortion, they had drones dropping the day after pill or something.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The back alley abortions with coat hangers that were so awful pre-Roe in the 60s. Hopefully, abortion, medically induced abortions will relieve some of, or most hopefully, of the tragedy of that.
Right.
But we're still making it really hard.
Yeah.
And of course, in some cases, the burden falls on men, but this is mostly, the burden of pregnancy is 100% on women. And then the burden, I've always understood that of course, that in terms of the body, can you imagine? Men would never allow this to happen. We always say it's cliche, but it's true. Men would never allow the government to do this to men. There's no chance. But leaving aside the 9 months, it's women in our country who bear the burden of the economic oppression that comes with unwanted children. And we just don't care about women. We don't. Not compared to other countries. This data shows we don't care about women compared to other countries. We care about tanks. We care about guns. We care about, all kinds of things. Spaceships.
Power and money.
Power and money. And big penises, I think.
And golf.
No, I'm serious. No, that's what guns are. Remember that woman who called into your show and said that? Psychiatrist?
Yeah, for sure.
I made a joke about it, and then someone called and said, no, you're right, Eric. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's a direct correlation to the size of the penis. I think it's just toxic masculinity. I think it's the idea of I can protect myself from you. I can beat you up.
Right.
Yeah.
And toxic masculinity comes in again with the Wild West frontier mentality that America still has.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
even though we don't have a Wild West anymore.
But again, it's a problem throughout the world. But it's certainly
it is a problem throughout the world. However, there's other data. I won't go through all the data in my piece, but we are either last or second to last or third to last in terms of democracies in virtually every area of fetal care, baby care, child care, family care, maternity leave, paternity leave. We are like last or next to last in every category. And we have the most money. It's just, Pete, it drives me nuts.
Yep.
It really does.
It's also just an argument as to why we have to have more women in power, making policy, on judges, on courts.
Well, but here's the weird thing about that. Yes, I agree, of course. That's definitely true. Justice Ginsburg's famous cliched response to that, which was, how many women justices would you like? She said 9, which I think it was a great answer, but she gave.
That's fine.
But there are the Amy Barretts of this world. And Amy Barrett would disagree with everything you and I just said.
Sure. No, not to say that all women, right?
And, but the connection there is religion.
Religion. I was about to say that. They're overwhelmingly religious. Those who are against what we're saying.
Yes.
All right. Well, another great conversation. I love talking to you. I appreciate it. I hope I hope the women out there didn't mind this two guys talking about all this. You're all welcome to join the conversation anytime. So.
Yeah, I think on that point, Pete, it's fair, and I don't think anyone should be ashamed. That's the wrong word. We shouldn't be shy about speaking up.
No, I think it's important. That's why I do it. That's why I taped it, and I'm going to play it for everybody. I think that it's important to role model and to have these thoughts, and I don't think it's virtuous. Everybody goes, "Oh, you're virtuous." Shut up. No. It's just I believe that everybody should have the same rights as me. That's all. That's what I believe.
But in my case, and your case, I'll only speak for me here, but I know because of our past friendships, you agree. I have 3 daughters. One is 30, but the other 2 are 12 and 13. But even my 30-year-old, I want to role model for them how I think men should behave on these issues. And I don't feel embarrassed talking about it.
I completely agree. And you've been a role model for me as a dad of girls. And the other thing people will say was, "Oh, you're doing this. You shouldn't have to be a father of a daughter. It should just be the way it is." And it's like, now I always say about that, like, if my child had cystic fibrosis, I'd be an advocate for cystic fibrosis, but she doesn't, so I don't.
Yeah,
no offense to anybody with cystic fibrosis,
but I do want to end P with one point, which I really tried to make clear in this blog post, which is there are reasonable arguments against abortion. There are, I'm not going to. Someone who believes it's murder, I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm not saying that. I mean, there are reasonable arguments against it. I don't adopt them, but they are reasonable. Maybe there are reasonable arguments about tax dollars and what they should go for in terms of childcare and all that stuff. Maybe. But I can't think of any reasonable argument that says you have to have the baby and we're not taking care of it. The combination of the two, to me, is just, in the words of the Constitution, cruel and unusual to poor people. And that's what really gets me riled up.
Yep. Really good point. Great place to end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete.
There you go, another thoughtful conversation with Eric Siegel. I would love to know what your thoughts were on that one. Definitely leave a comment. If you're a subscriber at the Patreon page, email me or tweet me at Pete Dominic. My email, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Dr. Meghan May, Professor Eric Siegel. So great to have both of them. Go tweet them and thank them for joining me. Again, thank you to everybody who joined me last night on Team Stand Up first meeting. I'll see you this Thursday, 8 p.m. for our regular meeting, our hangout on Thursdays at 8 p.m. East. If you're a subscriber, you can get the link to join me there. Send me your vitamin N pictures, everybody. Today's is fantastic from Tim Fox out in Oregon, where his daughter got married. Congratulations, Tim. Thank you very much for that shot, and subscribe to see those pictures every day, and you'll get the email along with the show to listen to and more. All right, that's it. I am out of here. Thank you for listening. It's time to get to John Carroll, who's going to take us out with the great Stand Up.
They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was going to come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right. We got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.